Hey, what's up guys? Today, I'll show you a horror mystery film, Tethered. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins with an audio recording of a man addressing his son. He explains that they've moved to the farm to keep their son Solomon safe and to help the mother get well, but she isn't getting better. The man's worried that his wife's getting worse instead. We then see Solomon standing by the edge of the woods, watching a figure drag something bloody away. The next time we see Solomon, it's apparent that he's blind. He's sitting on the porch, collecting crickets in a jar. The mother walks out of their house and calls for him, so they can check their traps. She goes to help him put on his coat. Then Solomon reaches for a rope that he puts around his waist, as well as a long stick that'll act as his guide. The mother tells Solomon that she'll let him find the first trap. Solomon navigates around with one hand searching for the warning bells they've put out, while the other hand guides the long stick to tap on the animal trap. The next morning, Solomon tells his mother that his cricket's no longer jumping. She asks him how long he has kept it in the jar and shrugs. She gently reminds him that creatures can't survive in the jar for long, teaching him that they'll need to breathe, eat, and drink to survive. She then announces it's his father's birthday, and she'll take him fishing, since it was his father's favorite activity for the two of them before, as well as bake a cake. Solomon gets ready in excitement, putting on the rope around his waist before heading out. While walking through the woods, the mother stops for a moment while listening to their surroundings. Solomon asks her what happened, but she brushes him off. Solomon asks where the animal went, and she compliments him for being observant. She explains that maybe the animals went to find their food as well. As they're sitting and fishing by the riverbank, Solomon suddenly asks his mother what happens when people die. This takes her off guard, and she inquires why he's thinking of such thoughts. She smoothly explains death isn't the end, but rather more of a change. Solomon asks his mother to clarify, and she compares the change to a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. In her words, life goes on, but in a different way. She then changes the subject, informing him that he doesn't have to worry about it just yet, since he's young and strong, and she assures him that he'll be around for a long time. While Solomon's looking for worms to use as bait, his mother hears rustling not too far from where they are. She straightens up and calls for her son. On the other hand, the younger boy has a bunch of worms on his hand when he comes across a large chain that he tugs on. She surprises him by admonishing him for straying too far, and he shows her the worms he had found. She agrees the worms are big, but tells him they need to leave immediately. Back at the farm, the mother is tilling the soil when her son exclaims that he got a root crop. She praises him and encourages him to keep going. She leads her son to his digging as she takes the goat aside for milking. That evening, the mother serves cake and begins singing happy birthday, but Solomon stops her, asking if they have to. She tells him that she thought it might be nice, but he tells her that he doesn't feel like it. She agrees easily and sets the cake in front of him, advising him to make a wish and blow out the candle. She asks what he wished for, and he informs her that he can't tell. While tickling and hugging Solomon, the mother lets out a couple of real bad coughs. It looks like her health is worsening, but she's keeping it from Solomon. During bedtime, a tape recorder plays a record of the couple, reading a bedtime story for Solomon. She has the book on both of their laps, as she hugs and kisses Solomon lovingly. The story is a bit peculiar, talking of a family of goats and how the goats stayed safe until the baby ventured away from home. The baby goat comes across a monster, and it runs away back home in fear. After coming home to his parents, the baby goat vows to never leave their side and to stay at home always. The story seems to be foreboding. As it ends, Solomon declares that he's glad the baby goat made it home all right, and she agrees with him. She brings up the talk they had earlier about death, and Solomon admits that he still doesn't understand. She assures him that it's all right since no one truly does, which is why it's important to have faith. Solomon asks what faith is, and the mother likens it to the time when they thought the goat wasn't going to make it when she got sick, but Solomon knew that there was no way she was going to die. Solomon confesses that he has faith in a lot of things since he can't see, and the mother only comments that he's a good boy, then bids him a good night. Before she could leave completely, Solomon calls out for his mother and tells her that he has faith in her. She returns the sentiment. Something happens that night. After leaving Solomon's room, the mother heads out into the woods mysteriously, despite the thunder and lightning above. Many years later, a teenage Solomon is now listening to his mother's tape recording where she tells him that she needed to leave him. She encourages him to continue without her and reminds him to follow their 3 rules to keep safe. Rule number 1 is to always give back to the woods that provide. Rule number 2 is to find comfort in singing their song in times that his will is almost gone and is close to giving up. The final rule, and the most important, is that he must never let go of the rope, since the rope is his guide, the land is his home, and the rope will ensure that he's safe from harm. For that day, Solomon goes through all the traps that were set up previously, but is only able to take home one measly fish he caught while fishing. When he gets home, he lies in the middle of the field, picking at the grass, obviously frustrated with his life. His days are a blur, pretty much the same one after another, until he hears a strange growl and chains dragging. He listens to it, but doesn't do anything, so he chooses to go back home instead of investigating it further. Unable to sleep, Solomon gears up when he hears the goat bleeding in distress. This worries him, so he hurries to check on it. Unfortunately, he touches the bloody corpse of it. He gasps and asks what happened, but the goat is then dragged away by an unknown force. Unfortunately, the traps are still empty the next day, and Solomon is resting by a tree, looking defeated, when he hears a gunshot deep in the woods. He jumps into action to check on what it is and finds a dead deer. While checking on the deer, someone comes up from behind to tell him that the deer was his. Frightened, Solomon takes out a knife to defend himself against the man, but the man hits him on the head with the butt of his gun, knocking him out. Solomon flinches awake as the man who shot the deer tends to his injury. He tells Solomon to calm down and promises that he won't hurt him. Solomon asks him how they got home, and the man points out that he followed Solomon's rope. He jokes that Solomon was tied up to the house because he didn't want to lose it. He asks him about Solomon's parents and if there's anyone else around. He then goes to return Solomon's knife, which the boy grabs from him, waving it around and warning the man that he's not a kid. The man agrees before introducing himself as Hank. He offers to clean Solomon's cut, as well as give him aspirin in exchange for a place to stay until the morning. Solomon insists that he doesn't need Hank's help, but the man admits that he needs Solomon's, since he'll be lost once the sun's down. He also offers the deer he shot, so that he can make the both of them dinner. Solomon storms off, and Hank smiles and tells him that he'll take it as a yes. While Solomon's busy chopping up wood and the stew is cooking, Hank decides to explore more of the house. He finds a couple of Solomon's stuff before taking the baby goat bedtime storybook. Finishing up with his stew, Hank overhears Solomon listening to his mother's audio recording. During dinner, Solomon eats the stew Hank prepares enthusiastically. Hank then asks if he can sleep by the fire that evening, and Solomon agrees. He then broaches the topic of taking Solomon with him the next morning, since he noticed that Solomon's running low on supplies and he can take him somewhere safe, but the boy rejects the idea immediately, insisting that he doesn't need help. Hank then changes the subject to seeing Solomon's parents' photo and sharing that Solomon looks so much like his mom. Solomon declares that he loves her. Solomon and Hank wake up startled when they hear a loud monstrous groan coming from the woods. Hank goes for his gun while Solomon climbs down the stairs nervously. When they go out of the porch, they don't see anything, and Hank interrogates Solomon about the sound. Solomon admits he doesn't know what it was and doesn't think he had ever heard the noise before. Hank heads inside to get a flashlight, and Solomon tries to convince him not to check on it since the noise has stopped. Hank instructs him to stay and promises to be right back. Anxious, Solomon hums to himself. In the woods, Hank finds a bear's corpse. Something attacked and devoured the beast. As he examines his surroundings, he takes a shot at a figure standing a couple of feet away. He waits for it to fall, but instead, the figure growls and runs toward him. Hank makes his narrow escape out of the woods, with the figure nowhere in sight. Hank returns to the house and looks for Solomon to ask him about the creature, but he is rocking himself back and forth in his room and humming as he tries to calm himself down. Hank bugs Solomon about the creature, but the boy refuses to answer, finally hiding underneath his blanket, still rocking himself. Hank shares that whatever it was big enough to take down a bear before reassuring the boy that they're safe. Hank wakes up the next day to Solomon working around the house. He attempts to ask about the noise last night, but Solomon still doesn't answer. He then brings up the deer he caught and offers to teach Solomon how to preserve it so that he can have some jerky for winter. He plans to set up the old smoker he found and asks Solomon for some chain they could use. Solomon remembers the chain he found when he was younger and told Hank that. Hank asks for him to lead the way so that he can check and see if they can use it. The two find the chain, and Hank agrees that the chain seems to be stuck to something. He asks if Solomon would like to come, but since his rope doesn't go any further, Solomon shakes his head. Hank is led to a den, but doesn't check more. He cuts the chain and goes back to Solomon, sharing his discovery. He tells him not to worry about it since they already got what they needed, so it's not important anymore. As Hank's setting up the smoker, Solomon asks if he could have a piece of the deer, and Hank readily agrees since they have plenty. After getting his permission, Solomon takes a piece of the deer and offers it to the woods. Hank follows close behind and asks him what he's doing. Solomon explains that he hunts and scavenges for two, one for himself and the other for the woods. Hank blurts out if it's witchcraft and supposes that it's the reason why some animal was prowling around last night. He suggests they check on what the animal was while lights out, but Solomon refuses. Hank argues that whatever's out there won't go away, especially since he keeps feeding it. He recommends that they set a trap for it. Solomon finally gives in and asks Hank how he can help. Hank adds length to Solomon's rope so he can still stay tied up to the original one. He goes inside to get a large trap and leads Solomon back into the woods to hopefully catch the creature that's been bothering them. While exploring, Solomon is suddenly dragged by the rope and away from Hank. He begs Hank to get him, as Hank chases after him, yelling his name. When he finally catches up to Solomon, Hank tells Solomon they're going home since it's not safe for them to stay longer in the woods. Back at home, Hank comforts Solomon and promises that whatever's out in the woods won't be able to get inside the house. He tries to convince Solomon that the trap they've set out will catch it. Hank then asks Solomon if he knew about the journal his mother wrote. Solomon admits he didn't and asks what it says. Hank then asks for his permission to read it. It seems the mother started the journal when Solomon was just 4 years old. She shares that it was his father's idea for her to keep a journal, so that she can take down all of the things they do together. Hank stops when the mother's story takes a turn. It appears Solomon's parents had gotten into an argument after his father tried to take Solomon away from her. His father thought being in the middle of the forest was doing more harm than good, but she believes she did the right thing. It's heavily insinuated that she either drove his father away or had hurt him badly after that. Hank doesn't know how to explain this to Solomon. He makes an excuse that it's late and persuades Solomon to rest. As Solomon rests, Hank sets out with another large trap to hunt for the creature giving them trouble. He finally stops when he finds himself in the middle of the woods, surrounded by so many animal bones. The next day, Solomon wakes up with Hank still not back. He puts on his rope guide and walks around the farm, looking and yelling for the man. While searching in the woods, Hank comes across a makeshift shelter and finds another journal in the mother's handwriting addressed to Solomon. It's filled with scribbles of apologies. It's getting late, so Hank decides to go back to Solomon. While listening to his mother's recording, Solomon hears a gunshot go off. Worried, he immediately heads for the woods. He reaches the end of his rope and only comes across Hank's bag. He finally takes off his rope guide and crawls to continue looking for him. Solomon ends up where Hank is surrounded by animal bones. There he comes across Hank's dead body. He lets out a scream. As he mourns Hank, he hears the rattling of chains. Shockingly, it's his mother as unkempt and neglected as Solomon, with chains wrapped tight around her body. It seems she was the creature that Solomon has been feeding in the forest, and the one who's been making all the noises at night. It can be deduced she must have left Solomon willingly that night when she felt herself changing and chained herself in the forest in order to keep her son safe from her. His father had been right. Solomon straightens up and takes out his knife. The mother runs towards Solomon, seeming to attack her prey, but she's suddenly stopped by the chains wrapped around her. She struggles to reach for Solomon when the boy begins to hum their song. The mother hums back, and Solomon finally realizes it's his mother. The mother breaks free from her dilapidated chain and hugs Solomon tight, but he's still holding onto his knife. He stabs her repeatedly. The movie ends with Solomon going into a coughing fit. He closes his eyes, and when he opens them again, his former milky white eyes are sporting cat-eye corneas. It strongly suggested that whatever was ailing his mother was contagious and had transferred to Solomon when they touched. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.